Starting this October, a unique series of workshops will begin that will shape the way we view relationships through safety in the workplace. In this video, the father of organisational safety, Edgar Schein, and author, high priestess, and beautiful human, Rosa Antonia Carrillo, will discuss the importance of relationships in safety leadership.
Hello, my name is Rosa Carrillo, and I'm the author of The Relationship Factor in Safety Leadership. I'm really lucky to have a friend and colleague here to talk with me about my book and his book, Ed Schein, who has recently published with his son the Humble Leadership book. Ed Schein, for those few of you that may not know, is Professor Emeritus from MIT, and he has written probably the best-selling books on the topic of organizational culture and leadership. I met him when I was a graduate student, and he has been a very, very important influence on my work in terms of understanding culture, which eventually took me to the book that I wrote, which was The Relationship Factor in Safety Performance. I'm planning now to give a masterclass on that topic, and I want to take this opportunity to chat with you, Ed. Thank you so much for taking the time to get your insight into your thoughts about the important role of relationships in leadership and how that might apply to the safety professional. What are your thoughts?
Rosa, it's a great pleasure to be here with you. You know, we have worked together before, and I've always enjoyed it thoroughly. And this opportunity to talk about humble leadership is very welcome. The reason why it's so welcome is because Peter and I, my son and I, now think of leadership with the emphasis as a verb rather than a noun. Leadership is an activity that we are defining as a team sport. I think the age of the lone leader, the person in charge, knowing what to do and how to do it, is a vestige of the machine age of organizations. And organizations are no longer in that machine age. The problems that organizations face today are messy, complex, and involve interdependent units of all sorts that the leader could not possibly understand all of it on his or her own and could not possibly figure out what would be the right adaptive move without having open and trusting relationships with the people below, the people to the side, and the people above. So to get at this, we have defined, based on what anthropologists and sociologists have known all along, is that society does provide for 4 different ways that people relate to each other, where the minimum way, which we can think of as a level -1 relationship, is when person A or group A dominates person B or group B, where the relationship is entirely based on power, and we know that that does not lead to good collective problem solving. So level -1 is domination, which is based on power and doesn't work very well. Most of history has dealt with what we're calling level 2, and by the way, there will be just 4 levels. Level 2 is the instrumental transactional relationship that is the characteristic of the modern organization built on hierarchy, and we think of that as bureaucracy. Everyone is in a role, they're trained to play that role. The place works well because the coordination is between roles rather than between people, and we maintain considerable professional distance in order to make it work, because we don't want bosses hiring their relatives and giving favoritism and so on. Now, why isn't this the correct model anymore? Why do we need a level 3 and 4? I mean, a level 2 and 3. Because what we have learned is the transactional relationship combined with competitive relationships between people in their career, which is sort of the Western approach to careers, do not have any incentive whatsoever to tell their boss what's really going on, to tell their boss the truth, because they've also learned that at some level, the boss thinks he or she knows it all and doesn't even provide incentives to tell what's really going on. So as problems get more complex and messy, we end up having to personalize, or we've invented the term personize. We have to get to know each other. Why? Because we have to build a communication link an openness and a trustworthiness that enables the boss to be clear in talking to the direct reports, and the direct reports being very clear and open in revealing what they know about what is working, what isn't working, and what could work. So in the modern relational interdependent organization, which includes the high hazard organizations, in which safety is not just an option, but an absolute requirement, it is perfectly clear to us that open and trusting communications are the essence of what the relationship has to be between the leader who has the official authority and the people around him or her in order to provide leadership, which is to solve problems in a new and better way. Now, there is a level 3 intimacy, which may or may not apply, depending on the nature of the task. If you're a SEALs team where your life depends upon how your team members have your back and help you, we may even want at those levels a more intimate relationship that we usually reserve for our best friends and our family. But it is beginning to be clearer and clearer to me that in modern organizations, at the minimum, we need level 2 personalized relationships, and that they are especially critical in the safety arena because we can no longer engage in hazardous activities, which includes, by the way, pandemics, and have these very high death rates. And all that depends on building better relationships, and all that leads directly to why your book is so important.
Thank you for that, Ed. So for the safety professional, oftentimes they don't really have the authority to make the kinds of changes that line managers have. So how would a safety professional or someone in more of a consulting role build those kinds of relationships, and how could that improve their effectiveness?
Organizations that I've dealt with that take safety seriously, that safety professional would be a direct report to the CEO. So if that is not the case, then the first job of that safety professional will have to be to build that upward relationship and to make it clear that if the safety is number one issue, is not what the CEO is personally driving, then there's very little that the safety professional can do to make it happen.
Mm-hmm.
Because the CEO will inevitably send mixed signals that productivity and schedule are equally important. And the minute that signal goes out, the middle level manager will have no incentive to pay much attention to the safety professional, because that person's career will depend on meeting the schedule and productivity targets.
One of the things that I noticed, and I was rereading your book for our interview, and I noticed that you talked about relationship as a set of mutual expectations. And also, when you're in a relationship, when you have a degree of comfort with each other, you feel relaxed in the presence of the other person, which makes sense to me, because if I don't know you, I have to be really careful about what I say so that I don't offend you or I don't lose credibility with you. But if I do know you and we have a relationship, I can be a little bit more authentic. In my book, I talked about it more as a biological function that we needed to have relationship because we have that need to belong. And that is handed down to us from ancient times, when if you were thrown out of the tribe, you perished, right? So, but I really liked what you said about the mutual expectations and the level of comfort. Do you also feel that relationship is a social need that is very strong in organizations, and that's part of the reason why organizations may not succeed, is that they're not fulfilling that need?
Part of what I described as level 2 and level 3 relationships plays out this way. I think I heard you say that biologically we really need level 3 relationships. And we have those in our tribe, with our friends and with our family. The big question that you raise is, do we need that relationship in the work area, or is there a choice between level 2, level 1 relationships where historically in organizations we've settled for level one relationships that are just transactional.
Yes.
And I think what you're trying to argue is, no, that's not enough. What we really need is that personal level two or maybe even level three relationship where trust applies. Expectations doesn't solve the problem, because in the -1 dominating relationships, the expectations are very clear and well known.
Mm-hmm.
They're just negative.
The things that we've discussed a lot amongst the safety professionals is that we tend to isolate safety from the rest of the organization as if safety could exist in isolation, but it's not, it doesn't. You can't have a really strong safety performance if you're having poor quality or you're having low morale or other poor customer service. So it all gets integrated. Safety gets integrated into all the other forms of organizational performance. So this idea of personal relationships, you first brought it up, I think, in your book, Humble Consulting. Was that the first time?
Yes, right.
Yeah. And why did it become important to you at that time? What, did something particular happen? Were you working with a particular issue?
No, I think the answer to that, which also bears on what you had said before about our need for a relationship, way back to my book on process consulting, which goes way back to 1969, I argued that I discovered that the consultant and the client have to build a relationship with each other. But at that time, like you, I was just saying a relationship. I wasn't being specific enough to say what I really meant. And what I really meant is that the two parties, the consultant and the client, have to get to the point of knowing each other well enough
Mm-hmm.
that when it comes to diagnosing what's going on here and what do we do about it, whether that's a quality problem or an efficiency problem or a safety problem, that they have a common language and a common sense of accountability for doing something about it. That the consultant gets out of the expert role of, now I'm going to tell you what to do, and says, now how are we going to figure out what to do? And it's only in the recent work with my son that I've realized that I have to say what that we relationship is by contrasting it to the dominating or transactional types of relationships.
Yes, it reminds me of humble inquiry. That was where you first began that path. That you were actually building the relationships with people by asking questions and being curious, which you brought up again in humble inquiry, this whole aspect of, go out and meet people and be curious about them, ask questions, that's the path to building a relationship, right?
Absolutely, and it leads me directly to the idea that if we were designing a workshop for safety professionals, then the very first thing they would have to learn is how to build those level 2 relationships, especially upward and laterally. Because unless they have the relationship upward and laterally, the organization will not learn to provide the incentives for the people down below the safety professional to even pay attention to that safety professional. The only way the safety professional can ensure that is by herself or himself learning to build those level 2 relationships upward and sideways.
I have seen exceptions to the rule where a safety professional can build meaningful relationships with employees, and he's respected and liked by the employees, but lacks the lateral and upward relationships to accomplish change. So I would agree with you in terms of up and sideways, and those are for the purpose of increasing your effectiveness, right?
What would be an example of a safety professional who could get the people below to do this seriously if he or she doesn't have lateral and upward relationships of that sort?
Well, there's a relationship of, you've got my back, I've got your back. So if a safety professional were to go out and show true concern and value to an employee, then an employee would say, well, because he has done me this valuable service, I will do things the way he asks me to do them.
In that situation, what I have seen is if the safety professional doesn't have the relationship sideways and up, he or she is paralyzed in doing something that the subordinate says needs to be done. I've seen that over and over again. in a utility, the subordinate says to the trusted safety leader, these wires are eroded, they're going to spark and cause a major accident. And the boss says, I hear you, I understand you, I've reported it to engineering, but they've got so much else going on that we won't get to it till next week. And that begins to then become a disincentive for the next time for that subordinate to report yet another problem. Because the credibility of the safety professional now has become visible. As you know, he or she doesn't really have any influence upstairs. So what's the point of my bringing huge safety problems when I know he or she can't do anything about them?
I don't disagree with you. However, there is, I would say there's a kind of magic that exists when you treat somebody with respect. You do use humble inquiry, and you deliver things, because you're talking about really big things that the safety professional cannot deliver. But there are so many small things that happen during the workday. I can never find the right shovel for the job, which a safety professional can, provide that. But the big thing for me has been in how the safety professional builds that relationship through the humble inquiry and coming in and getting to know how people are doing the work, learning from them, so that when they come back and they offer advice or they ask them to do something a certain way, the person is more likely to listen to them. And I'm not saying that that's a perfect solution, because of course, if they don't have access to the top or lateral, then it can't grow throughout the organization. It just stays in that relationship pocket. And because I've seen team leaders in very dysfunctional organizations, but within their team, they're very high functioning because of that leadership interaction. And so they've almost built like a little trust and open communication zone, a small one, but it can't grow. And I think where you work, it's more, it's more organizational wide or even corporate wide.
The problem with encouraging the small zone is that it then is limited to those safety problems that are manageable within that zone.
Yes.
And if you're in an organization where the nature of safety is containable that way, then of course that is a very viable, workable way for the safety professional to operate. But it seems to me that if we take the pandemic as an example, if the team working on the patient totally trusts each other and have each other's back and have level 2 relationships, but cannot prevent the death of the patients because they don't have the equipment, at some point, the leader of that group has to say, it's not enough for us to work together well. We have to find a way to get the supply system to others on whom we depend to give us what we need. And my argument hinges on the fact that the world is working toward more problems that are not contained, that are interdependent throughout the organization. And so if I had the chance to talk to these same safety professionals, I would strongly argue that in the short run, you're good and it's wonderful. But if you don't at the same time make it a high priority for yourself to get into the executive suite and to point out how their behavior undermines you're doing something that your people are telling you needs to be done, that we're going to be in trouble.
I agree with you completely, Ed. And one of the things I'm going to be covering in the master class, I noticed in your book you had an exercise to make a map of your key relationships.
Yes, exactly.
And then a plan. So our minds were traveling along the same road there, because I want to make sure that everybody thinks about who are the allies that I need in the organization and how can I achieve a higher level of relationship with that person, and do that very consciously. So I'm in agreement with you. And in fact, I think maybe as we're talking, because I do work out in the field so much and I see how individual team leaders or safety professionals make things function because they're in there and they're almost like, you're plugging up the holes in the dam, right? And so things function until the dam breaks down. But in the meantime, these people who are very dedicated and very committed are there handling the crisis as they come up. So I don't know. I'm not saying that that's the best way to do it, but I think if they didn't do that, I don't know how many organizations would function.
I think where we agree is that this is absolutely a necessary function of the safety professional.
Mm-hmm.
If you can't develop those relationships downward, forget everything else. I'm just saying it's not enough.
No, and I agree with you.
Necessary but not sufficient if you're dealing with complex, messy, high hazard. Because I've learned that just slips, trips, and falls and OSHA stuff is a cop-out. If we have a good statistic on the OSHA stuff, we relax until somebody dies. And then suddenly we realize that having good OSHA statistics when there are safety-related deaths has got our priorities all screwed up. We really have to worry about the deaths and the life-threatening injuries and the absentee kinds of injuries, as well as, or even ahead of, slips, trips, and falls.
Yeah, and one of the challenges I've had, Ed, because I wrote the book, and I had, as you did, you have all these case histories, and you show how this leader was successful because they used the relationships in the organization, they built them, and then they were able to level two relationships. But it is so hard to get managers and even most safety professionals to adopt the practice of relationship building. There's so many assumptions and beliefs in place that prevent them from seeing the benefit of that.
I'll turn that around and say
that
safety is the best way into effectiveness, I've discovered.
Tell me more about that. What's been your experience?
To make a company more effective, I look for safety problems, and this is especially true in medicine. You can get a lot more mileage out of patient safety issues than you can out of better health issues. If patients die and they're unwarranted deaths, they scramble to get better instead of scrambling to get better in the first place. So I think the safety arena is the place to be as a consultant. I don't think many people will hire you on your book to become more effective, even though that is exactly what they should be doing. If they followed the same principles in your book around general effectiveness, they would be a better company. But that doesn't occur to them. If you can sneak in around safety and point out that that'll also make for a better company, then you've got a chance. That's been my experience.
But you were saying that's if somebody dies, but what if you're working in a company that has a pretty good safety record? Like, so many people have written about the Macondo well explosion, that they were doing really well, and then one day they had this explosion, which they were not prepared for. They were not prepared to handle. So it goes back to my question, which is, as a psychologist, why do you think it's so hard for people to embrace the idea of relationship building as a way to make the organization more efficient, more effective?
If we talk about British Petroleum, their stereotype of doing well was a false datum. They had the Texas City explosion, which killed a lot of people. They had acquired Amoco, which was not doing all that well. And they had imposed a bunch of OSHA-type rules, which we encountered at MIT with the BP Sloan fellows who came to special programs wouldn't ride in buses that didn't have safety. And we thought, wow, there's a company that really thinks about safety. Well, yes, they do at that trivial level, but they never really explained how they happen to have housing near an explosive chemical plant, Texas City. And when you look at Macondo, on the very day that they were having the explosions, there was on another level a set of BP executives handing out safety awards for good OSHA statistics.
Right.
Now, if you're in that bind, you don't start with the question of what do we do with a company that has a good safety record. We start with the question of how come a stereotyped good safety company is having deadly accidents. So something is not factually correct here.
Yeah.
You have to challenge that good company stereotype if you're the consultant.
But I don't know how to measure relationships, do you?
I think companies can measure it themselves very easily if you get their attention.
You mean like through the Gallup poll type?
No, it's not a measurement, it's self-insight. I think the minute we go into measurement and go into surveys, we're in trouble. Now, Human Synergistics will claim that their surveys do get at this in terms of what they define as not a passive or not an aggressive relationship, but a constructive relationship. They will argue that the components of a constructive relationship would be very similar to what Peter and I talk about as a level 2 relationship. So that's the one organization I would accept as having a process. And they also use then a vehicle for saying, here's a way to describe how things work. And then asking the same people in an ideal, if this were an ideal organization, how would you like it to work? Mm. And how would you like it almost always resembles the level 2.
Mm. So it's more of a narrative inquiry than, it's not a questionnaire, it's a conversation.
Absolutely, and it starts with my quick definition of the 4 levels. Because when I've given that to a manager and said, well, look, there are 4 kinds of relationships, and let's talk about where you're at right now and where you want to be. They very quickly see that they are mostly transactional and that they would like to be at level 2. And then you say, well, is there anywhere in your organization where you already see level 2 relationships? And then what are they doing that's different? And building the logic that way. See, that's the process consultation side.
Yes.
If you measure it, then you're making yourself the expert. You're going to tell them how they're doing. And
yes.
I would rather have them understand these 4 levels. And what you discover then, Peter and I did this with a group of residents at Stanford Health. They were 3rd-year residents, and we not only gave them the map, but we gave them the 4 relationships and said, now rate each of the relationships with your bosses, your peers, and with your subordinates. And then we took a poll. And the surprising thing was how many of them rated their relationship with their bosses as -1.
Oh, that's painful.
But think of how much insight that produced. So no wonder, they're doing what their bosses are expecting of them. Mm-hmm. And if you turn that into a safety talk and said, now, are there times when your boss is asking you to do a procedure that you question? Would you tell him? Mm-hmm. That's where the safety issue hits the road.
Definitely. I know that's a huge issue in healthcare, getting people to say something when they think something is not being done correctly.
I think when you're talking to these line safety professionals, the way to get them to think bigger is through these kinds of examples. Mm-hmm. Instead of rewarding them for all the good they've done with their subordinates, which you should do, the bigger issue is the wake-up call for them that won't be enough.
Yeah. The other area that I have found emerging as more and more important, it was always important, but I think we're becoming more aware of the relationship between frontline leaders and employees, how critical those relationships are. But we don't educate managers, supervisors, safety professionals. We don't educate them on how to build relationships. Does curriculum like that even exist? I know it wasn't in the MBA program where I was participating. We never covered the importance of relationships.
I think you're right. And we only admired it when we found companies that were very relational and admired how well they were doing. But then when we looked at how they got there, like Procter & Gamble was for a long time a poster child, they had invested heavily in Richard Beckhardt at the board, even at the board level. They had created a cadre of organization development specialists out of some of their senior unionized employees. They sent them to NTL and trained them in the NTL plan change stuff, and then brought them back as on the staff of the plant manager. So the plant manager had a human resource professional as well as an OD professional on his staff, And that improved union relationships, it improved productivity, it improved everything, because you had now a process specialist in-house. But the traditional model is a level one model of how organizations work.
Leave your emotions and relationships at the door. Everything is very effective and logical.
Exactly.
Yeah, and in fact, you wrote in one of the emails you wrote me, you mentioned that about the social technical, which it says, we all talk about organizations as social technical systems, but as I think about the safety literature, it is heavily based towards various series and models that start with technical problems. Yours might be the first book out there that says that if we don't make the social problems as primary, the technical problems will not be solved. And I have to tell you, Ed, that idea that you're proposing has gotten so many people upset in the safety community.
Really?
Because they feel that it threatens the primacy of taking care of the risks and the hazards.
How does it do that?
Well, because now we're, in their minds, now we're talking about being nice to people, psychological safety, social needs, and we're not emphasizing enough on the technical side of managing risk.
Well, that's one of the reasons why we differentiate the 4 levels. Because I have to say, the problem, Mr. Technical, that's why I say it's not about psychological safety per se. It's about level 2 relationships, which create open communication channels. And that's why you need that in the socio-tech system. You need openness and trust. So I'm for openness and trust as the underlying necessities in the socio part of the socio-technical.
I'm with you. Dick Beckhard would always call them the social processes, trusted communication. Wow, well, I think we covered a lot. Someday I would like to talk to you about McGregor's theory X and theory Y, because I know that you wrote a piece that he wasn't really insinuating that theory Y was better than theory X, that he was just making the observation. But of course, once you write something, you no longer own it. So now we've turned it into theory Y as being the proper way to lead. So right then.
I'll look forward to getting this material sometime. I'm in no hurry.
All right, fantastic.
I'm glad.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. Have a nice evening.
Level 1 of the Relationship Factor in Human Performance Masterclass, presented by Rosa Antonia Carrillo, in partnership with the Australian Institute of Health and Safety, begins October 20th. To purchase a ticket, head to the Art of Work website events page via the link below. Come ready to learn and participate in a special event full of curious minds and innovative ideas. We look forward to seeing you all there.